Hello, I'm Ben Farrell, I'm the Chief Executive of CIPS, and welcome to the second in our emergency webinars to the war in the Middle East. And we wanted to facilitate a gathering of the global professionals, both in procurement and supply, interested in establishing, the current analysis and perspective that may guide our collective response to what's going on. We've got an amazing panel of experts from across the globe joining us today. So the format this afternoon will be, I'm going to hand over to Dr. John Glen, our global chief economist at CIPS, who's going to set the scene. He'll hand back to me, and then we're going to have a Q&A facilitated by Matthew Rock, our content director. And so without further ado, good afternoon to everybody who's joining from an amazing number of different places around the world. Good to see you all. You're incredibly welcome. And please feel free to add any questions you'd like in the chat, and we will get to them. We've had quite a lot of questions already. In fact, loads and loads of questions. We'll work our way through those. There's some key themes that we will aim to cover and come back to your questions. What we will do is then share the recorded version of this webinar to everybody who's registered subsequently to this meeting. So very good to be with you all this afternoon. Without further ado, I'm going to go straight to our chief economist, John Glen, please.
So good morning, afternoon or evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. What I'd like to do is try and take you through a step-by-step economic analysis of how the war is impacting the global economy. Well, the first and most obvious thing is increasing the price of oil. So year to date, so from the 1st of January 2026, the oil price has increased by about 70%, from $60 to $103 the last time I looked at it this morning. That's Brent crude price. So immediately, what does this do? Well, first of all, we see that there's a reduction in supply of oil. That's caused the price to increase. Which economies are most directly impacted by that? Well, the big economies of the eastern part of the globe, as you look from the United Kingdom. So it impacts very largely on India, on China, and on Japan, because they're very dependent on oil from the Gulf. So those economies find that there's a lack of supply of oil going in. They find that the oil price is increasing. An increase in oil price means that our transport costs, most notably the price that we pay for our petrol, as we say in the United Kingdom, or gas, as they say in North America, has gone up. This reduces our ability to spend elsewhere in the economy, and it means that our economies grow at a slower rate. So we're seeing low growth from major economies globally because of this increase in the price of oil, and that obviously affects employment. It affects our well-being. Okay. What we also see then is inflation in oil-related products, so fertilizers, and this impacts economies in Africa, for example. So Sudan gets 54% of its fertilizers out of the Straits of Hormuz. It comes out of the Middle East. Kenya 26%, and Somalia 30%. So we can see those economies impacted both in terms of the supply of fertilizer and obviously the price that they have to pay. So we're seeing petrol prices increasing, we're seeing the increase in food prices, and this has an impact then on a cost of living crisis, which we've been talking about in North America and Western Europe, and also an ability then to create social unrest, both in those economies and in African economies, where the ability then to subsidize gas costs or petrol costs, to reduce those petrol costs and to reduce those food costs is severely limited, because many of our economies have debt, public debt, which is at very, very high levels, in many cases more than 100% of GDP. So we see global growth being damaged by the increase in oil prices, that then having a contagion elsewhere, because big economies like North America, like those in Western Europe, like those of East Asia, are not demanding as much as they would otherwise do. That causing a reduction in activity, and that then impacting the growth of all economies across the world. We then say the inflation having a contagion effect both directly through the impact of oil and then by petroleum related products. The next issue that we need to have a look at then is the impact that that has on interest rates. So we've seen interest rates globally increasing. First of all, if we look at the debt, government debt and the interest rates that we pay on government debt, we've seen yields increasing on government debt as the global economy is perceived to have more risk. So if you want to go to the markets and borrow more money, the markets are saying, yes, you can have that money, but we perceive a higher rate of risk, and therefore you're going to have to pay a high rate of interest on that money. So if you take economies like the United Kingdom, which have been seeking to reduce government debt in order to reduce the interest payments, that means that we still have to pay higher interest than we were expecting, and it limits the ability of our government to offset some of the impact on the cost of living of higher petrol prices and higher food prices. And it also means that interest rates in our economy are higher than they would otherwise have been. So I spoke on a webinar yesterday looking at the cost of mortgages in the United Kingdom, and a £350,000 mortgage, which is the typical mortgage in London, would now pay an extra £1,000 a year in interest rate costs. So that means that £1,000 is taken out of the economy. It means our economy is not going to grow at as fast a rate, and it means that employment and economic activity and our well-being is impacted. So we now then have a situation of, so there's the global economy, reduced GDP growth, increased inflation, higher rates of interest, which have an effect across the globe. What we then need to look at is, when do we think this will end? What are the expectations of oil prices going forward? So if we look at the current futures market this morning, there is an expectation that oil prices will come down this year. And I would argue that that's predicated on a number of factors. First of all, the fact that some oil is coming through the Straits of Hormuz. So there seems to be this standoff at the moment where Iran is allowing oil, particularly to go out to East Asia, to Pakistan, or Pakistan carriers taking it into India, taking it to China, and taking it to Japan. So that's allowing an amount of oil to go out. It allows an amount of Iranian oil to go out as well. And I think there's an issue there about how much volume is going to be allowed to go out through the Straits of Hormuz. And then the second thing is strategically what happens at Karg Island. I think if we have a situation where Karg Island were to be invaded, this is the Iranian depot, or were to be destroyed, that would create conflict in Hormuz, which would extend the war. So futures at the moment are expecting prices to go down, but their expectation is that prices will go down slowly, and we wouldn't get back anywhere near $60 a barrel to the end of 2027. Now, obviously, that is a market that you have to watch, as it will start to reflect expectations as those expectations change almost on a daily basis. Okay, so we can see the impact on inflation, we can see the impact on global GDP and growth of our economies, see the impact on interest rates probably being higher than they would otherwise have been, and then our expectations about how long this is going to last from an economic perspective are going to be impacted by the geopolitics and the extent to which we can move oil out of the Straits of Hormuz. And then the one last thing that I would say, just to get the complete picture, is you will have heard news about the Saudis' ability to take oil to their west coast and put it out through Yabel. That again is going to be impacted by the extent to which the Houthis are going to increase their conflict in the Red Sea. So I think, Matthew, that's where I'm going to leave it, and I think I'll hand it back to Ben.
Brilliant. Thanks, John, for an excellent sort of analysis of the implications of what's going on the economy. We're going to go now, as I mentioned, to the Q&A, which I shall hand over to Matthew, please, to orchestrate. and over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, John, as well, for that incredibly clear analysis. And welcome everybody from literally all around the world, including, from Iraq and Riyadh, I see on the call. So, and Nigeria and Trinidad and an amazing array of countries. It's great to have you with us. We have a fantastic panel to discuss some of the issues that John has raised and also to address some of the questions that you have put already through to us. If I just introduce them briefly, then we'll crack on. So we have Shaima Al-Halabi, who's procurement leader at the telecoms group Zain Bahrain and chair of CIPS Bahrain branch, the first woman to hold this role. So great to have you with us, Shaima. We have David Shillingford, who is one of the sharpest minds in global supply chains. I recommend his LinkedIn to you. You must follow him quickly. His posts are absolutely fantastic, and it's great to have him with us. He's founder of Pegasus Analytics Innovations. We have Shamel El Kodari joining us from Cairo today, I believe, who is director of group supply chain at Giza Systems, the large systems integrator operating across the Middle East and Africa. So it's great to have you with us. We have Sarah Omer, who's a digital procurement leader working with iValua in the Middle East and Africa region. Great to have you with us, Sarah. And last but not least, of course, we have Will Nutting, who is the founder and the CEO of the excellent investment newsletter Nut Stuff. So Will, it's great to have you with us as well. Thank you all for joining us. David, I wanted to come to you first to get your responses to some of what John has said, and particularly perhaps to pick up the point about duration, which is, I think, probably above all else, the issue that is on people's mind. How long is this situation going to last? Now, you may not be able to answer that specifically, but I would like to get your view on how you see the risks changing dependent on how long this conflict goes on.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much. It's a kind introduction, Matthew, and great commentary from John. I think to build on that, I see most of the commentary looks at the impact, the operational, the financial, the economic impact of the different risks related to the conflict. And I think that time is not talked about enough. So thank you for the question. I think it's a key factor, and I'd break it down into three buckets. In supply chain risk management, we talk a lot about time to survive and time to recover, and I think those are both critical. I'll touch briefly on them, but there's also time to impact. If your factory burns down, time to impact is zero. But as you start thinking about downstream impacts of a disruption to your client and their client and their client, that time scale increases. So time to impact is going to vary dramatically depending upon how far away from the conflict zone a particular company is in terms of their supply chain. So that's number one, time to impact. The second, time to survive, is really, as it says, how long can I survive if this disruption keeps going? And we talk a lot about oil reserves. There are, of course, reserves of other types of raw materials, but they tend to be much lower because they are considered to be less strategic. Third, time to recover, and that is if the war was to end tomorrow, how long would it take for these different tiers, echelons of the supply chain to get back to normal? And that has a lot to do with how far out they are and various other factors. The point you make at the top is, of course, the war isn't ending tomorrow. And how long it goes on has a huge impact in terms of how far those ripple effects reach into different supply chains, into various different tiers. You mentioned fertilizer. It's a great example. It may be this planting season that it impacts Northern Hemisphere farmers. It may be a year from then in terms of the fertilizer reserves that they have. So I think time is really it's a very, very important factor for people to look at as they consider when are they going to be impacted and how much are they going to be impacted. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, David. That's great. I wanted to come to Will next and get a sort of markets perspective, if you like, but perhaps just picking on this question of risks. Will, from your position as an investment analyst, writer, I mean, what are the risks that we are not talking about that we should be?
Well, as we say, it's the unknown unknowns that kill you. I mean, I think you can make a case that, if collateral damage, were to happen, you were to end up with this war spreading in some shape or form to, what we've seen in Abu Dhabi and Dubai suddenly happening in London or New York. Let's just not even want to think about that stuff. That, I think, is where the risk comes. But I think the reality is, we said when we were talking before in our preamble, that the military aspect of this stuff should largely be done in the next week or 10 days. And then the question really is the degree to which what happens at Carg Island, as John was saying, and can there be some kind of a backdoor deal done to de-escalate this? I mean, I think one's got to maintain a positive attitude, and I think to relate this to the markets, stock markets are still pretty much near their highs. I mean, you haven't seen much money come out of markets. What you've seen is a massive rotation from only really needing to own 10 technology stocks, for the last couple of years, to suddenly realizing that the whole Maslow's pyramid of needs has been flipped around. And the problem is all the stock market capitalization sits inside the sort of self-actualization, morality, purpose, meaning, esteem, and needs. And actually, food, water, breathing, defense, shelter, security sits at the bottom of the pyramid. And people have just woken up to the fact that actually, in their pension funds and their investment funds, they need to have exposure to all that kind of stuff. And that's 6% of the market index weight. And 56% of the index sits in the top fluffy stuff that arguably you don't really need to worry about. So as we move into what people call this multipolar world, we move to a world of needs, not wants. And I think that rotation is a fascinating thing to see. And the market prices war in energy costs, logistic costs, very relevant to this call today, freight rates, insurance costs, tanker availability, all the input costs. So I think that's really from my perspective. I'm not a logistics expert, but I can tell you what the resting cost rate is for a tanker and tell you what the day rates are in a VLCC tanker are now. And it's a better business than any AI business out there from the point of view of return on physical assets. There's nothing in the world you want to own more than these tankers right now. These are hugely valuable. I think the only other thing I would offer is that what you're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz at the moment is really a very interesting, and this is a bit of an own goal, one of the many own goals probably for the Trump administration, is that you're seeing what a post-dollar yuan denominated world looks like. You're seeing a world where basically dollar assets cannot move and are ultimately worthless, and yuan denominated assets. The Strait of Hormuz is not closed. I don't know whether you could drive your speedboat through the Strait of Hormuz. You probably wouldn't want to, but the argument, it's not closed. It's closed purely from an insurance perspective and a perspective that if you've got the wrong flag, you're likely to have something nasty fired at you and be sunk. So I think what we need to think about is what Ben described very well as a new frontier of resilience. And I think it's no accident that gold and silver, in this environment where everyone's very nervous and scared, have actually proved to really be rather anemic. And actually, you're beginning to see this whole movement, which I guess is partly my world, of stable coins. You've actually seen a very resilient Bitcoin from the lows. And I think it takes a physical conflict to make people realize that cross-border, portable, 24/7 digital liquid assets with no counterparty risks suddenly are beginning to show that this is exactly the environment they were designed for. So it's USDC, it's USDT, it's going to be energy-backed stable coins, which is my world, which I think is something that's going to evolve. So, as I say, I think we're learning an enormous amount of lessons from this. We're clearly learning that there was no excess capacity of energy in the market, of crude oil, much tighter fundamental commodity market. So I don't know how to translate that into the world that you guys all exist and function in. But from my world of markets, I kind of see it very clearly being manifested. Markets have behaved incredibly logically. And I think they will continue to behave logically because the dustbins of market capitalization are in that at the peak, and the stuff that needs are the shot glasses and the pint mugs. And if you continue to shake the table, the slops will come out of the dustbins into the pint mugs. So I'm not sure if that's helpful.
Thank you, Will.
But that's how
it is. You've taken us into some big and profound places, into AI, into Bitcoin, and into some of these massive considerations. So thank you very much for that. It's really fascinating stuff. I mean, perhaps that is a good jumping off point to come down to some of the very specific considerations. And I wanted to come to Shaima next and get a perspective from Bahrain. I mean, just first off, conditions in Bahrain at the moment, Shaima, for you, the air flights are still closed into and out of Bahrain, as I understand. How are you doing?
We're doing fine as people, but logistically, yes, we are impacted. As I mentioned, as you've mentioned, we have an air closure currently that is going on. But we have the extended arm of KSA because there is a bridge between us and Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia, their air is operating normally. So most of the flights are rerouted to Saudi Arabia, and we are delivering to Bahrain by road.
Oh, okay, thank you for explaining that. And look after yourself. We're obviously here from the UK thinking about you. I wanted to talk to you about resilience, which is something you've commented on, and I've heard you talking about. And we've had some questions in specifically related to this. Resilience, of course, doesn't happen automatically, right? It's something that requires deliberate choices. And one of the questions that we had is, should the supply chain base shift from cost optimization towards strategic resilience in geopolitical conflicts? A related question, which resilience delivers best return on investment? Flexibility, buffers, diversification, logistics. I know it's something you have views around. I wonder, would it be interested to get your views on building resilience at a time like this from the point of view of a procurement and supply chain professional?
Sure, Matthew. Thank you so much. So I think it's not a choice anymore. It is about smart optimization. So in the past, we were focusing only about the unit cost, but today I think optimizing for continuity as well. And to be a strategic resilient in 2026, I believe it has more than one pillar. First of all is the visibility. So if you don't have visibility on your suppliers, you aren't resilient enough. And by using AI and to have predictive analysis to spot on the cracks in the global trading system weeks in advance before it happens. The second pillar I can see is agility, which means having an alternative. Don't just have a list of backup suppliers, have an active small scale of contracts with them so you can scale up instantly if a primary route is blocked. This is a mechanism that we adapted specifically in the region and in those past few weeks. And this is what we focused on, is our small scale of suppliers and contract to ensure the continuity as well. The third thing I can see is regionalization, which I've already mentioned about the collaboration between Bahrain and Saudi, where in the GCC, we are leveraging our geopolitical position to build shorter and more diverse trade bridges. As we are focusing into sourcing from closer to home to reduce the distance and the risks that we are having. So the best ROI today isn't found in the cheapest contract, I would say, but in the one that actually deliver when the world gets complicated.
Great. Thank you very much for very interesting comments. Thank you. I'd like to run a poll now, and I will then come on to our other panelists. We ran these questions last week, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see whether there have been any changes. So, if you wouldn't mind, to all our guests on the call, just clicking on the poll that we're about to launch. The question is: did your organisation have a plan to mitigate the current situation, e.g. a contingency for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? So if you could give us your answers, yes, no, or too soon to tell, that would be very helpful. And then we can tell you whether there was variation from this time a week ago. So we'll let them run for a second, and then we will have a look at the answers. So I think
Matthew,
probably enough time. Ben.
May I just build on Shema's commentary, which I thought was great. And the way I've started to talk about global supply is about supply web as opposed to supply chains. If you think historically that essentially a few decades of globalization has led perhaps to a unseen dependency across the globe. I was just thinking about equivalents to the Straits of Hormuz. You could put in the Panama Canal, Suez Canal, Straits of Malacca. There are probably 9 ports through which almost all global trade flows these days. So there is extraordinary vulnerability in our collective supply of the world. And I suppose thinking of your supply chains of the future, like supply webs, where you would have choices that you can draw upon based on, sustainability, cost, resilience, time, all those sorts of things. I think in the end, we can get to a stage where AI can serve us up choices on a daily basis almost of extraordinary adaptability if you put all the right factors together. And I think we must start to consider this in a way that reflects the new reality that, we live in a constant time of change, and whether that's through conflict, through pandemic, through the evolution of trade, having that adaptability. We've had lots of discussions about the future of the procurement supply profession, and often these come round to what are the preeminent skills needed to be successful in the future. And we talk about people like Tim Cook, he's a procurement supply person leading Apple, and other people with those great skills. And it always comes around to this ability to adapt and morph as you go to achieve the effects. And I'm increasingly talking about that through the supply web. Anyway, back to you.
No, thank you very much. And any comments about, should we be talking about supply webs rather than supply chains? Put your comments in the chat. Let's have a look at the results. So did your organization have a plan in place to mitigate the current situation? Yes, 17%, no, 52%, and too soon to tell, 32%. Last week, when we asked the same question, too soon to tell, 45%, no, 13%, and yes, 11%. So we've seen a little bit of growth in yes, and of growth in no, and a little bit of decrease in too soon to tell. So thank you very much for those answers. Very interesting indeed. And please share your thoughts on supply webs on the chat. I wanted to move on to develop the conversation with Shamel in Cairo. And a question that we had directly that came in from the audience today, Shamel, was what actions should buyers take now to reduce supply chain risks from geopolitical conflicts?
Okay, thank you so much, Matthew, for this. And let me build upon what has been already mentioned this webinar. Now we're already working on in a VUCA world, which we have volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity in everything. We used to think or focus, let's say, as supply chain professionals in the past maybe 15 to 20 years on the cost optimization. Is it needed, required? Of course it is But is it the one point that we should be focusing on now? No, it cannot be now. From my own perspective, I think we should think of a risk-adjusted sourcing strategy or different strategies to enable us to move to a risk-balanced supply chain. Maybe even, and some supply chain professionals may not agree with me on this, that we deliberately accept higher costs to reduce our disruption risks that we face. We have to acknowledge that what's happening now, disruptions that we see in the past maybe 8 to 10 years, the disruption is no longer an exception. It's part of our norm and day-to-day activities. So we have to start and implement or inject the risk DNA within our organization, within our teams to understand this. If we focus specifically on what actions we may be able to do, actually, I would start number one by, and I will say this, people, please have a risk registrar in your pocket, always. Always think of what risks could happen to you. If also I could split the risks here into, I would say, 2 levels. There is one risk which is already known to each and every one of us, which is the common risks, like, for example, supply risks that we face if a supplier goes out of business, if certain raw material is not available. This we know about and we deal with every day. But there is another kind of risk that we never think of, like, for example, the effect of such conflict, or maybe the COVID when it hit us at that time. You know, it reminds me, or there's some sort of analogy here. When we are young, we always think of certain diseases that it will not happen to us. So I don't even have to bother to think of, but it might happen to you. So you have to get ready and put this into your consideration. So this is the first thing that you have to map or think of all the risks that you may have. Number 2, you have to map your critical suppliers or critical supply chain and see where I need to be involved or focus on. Number 2, which I would take from what Shaimat has said, and I see this is very important, which is to increase your end-to-end visibility, your supply chain visibility, where AI, of course, play lots of in this place. It is very beneficial to really provide such visibility to us. Third thing, I would say to re-examine your supply chain, to think of, do I need to change the supply chain from globalization to localization, or maybe even regionalization? People think of, yes, we have to go to globalization and to go to every place, but this might affect you in such incidents that we have. But if we go to localization, yes, this is faster, much important to you, or in terms of sustainability, it's much better, the proximity of suppliers, but maybe you will not have enough, for example, suppliers to produce this raw material or product that you need. They might not have the best capabilities. How about regionalization, which is try to have your supply chain within the same region? I'm not talking only about your suppliers. No, actually, I'm talking about maybe you could focus that some SKUs that you are working on to be within the same region in terms of manufacturing, suppliers, distribution depot, even retail shops. This is something that you can think of. Fourth point, maybe I think of, which is, of course, definitely has to be embedded in our DNA, is always strengthen your supplier relationship. This is the time when you will need your supplier to be with you. A point I think that was raised in one of the questions, what will happen if my supplier asks for an extra uplifting
Yes.
on the contract value? I'll leave the people, of course, my fellows here to answer this, but would this come if you have such supplier relationship Maybe it will come in a different way. Last but not least, I would say that you have to focus on your inventory buffers, maybe for your strategic items. Again, this would take us back to the point that we have to think of or accept extra cost, but in these times to bypass or to overcome what we are facing. Last point I just want to mention that now as procurement leaders and supply chain professionals, it's not about getting suppliers, it's not about getting quotations, it's not about even building a relationship or something like that. It's about knowing more than this. You have to understand about geopolitical risks, the trade corridors that your shipments pass through, currency volatility, the insurance rates, interest rates, the regulatory shifts and laws in the countries that you're operating in. I hope this would answer your question, Matthew.
Extremely interesting. Thank you. And we have had a couple of comments coming in today about is there anything procurement teams can do to limit profiteering from suppliers as a result of the current situation, and other questions about suppliers pushing to raise prices at a time like this. We will come to those questions in a second, but thank you for raising that as well. Before I come to Sarah, I'm going to ask the next poll. So if we can bring the next poll up, that would be fantastic. And it's a question about using AI to help in a situation like this, to give us greater visibility, to give us greater sensitivity to market changes. So if you could answer the question, that would be great. Have you used AI to help shape your response to the current situation? Yes, no, and maybe are the options. So why don't I'm going to come to Sarah, and then we'll have a look at the results in a second, Sarah. But what's your view on using AI to help at a moment like this?
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. I think if I look back a little bit at the whole concept of the digitization of supply chain and procurement systems, if we compare the situation currently with the 2020 COVID, we definitely, at the COVID times, organizations were a little bit low in the maturity scale with regards to adopting technology and having more of end-to-end systems to manage their supply chains. And COVID came and gave us all of, lots of learning lessons at that time. I think even this webinar held on Zoom, that wasn't the norm before COVID. So there is a lot of progress in the digital landscape, in technologies, in ensuring that ERPs are connected with their warehouses, are connected with their finance, they're connected also with their sourcing and supply chain systems and supply relationship management and so forth. So this is an unfortunate situation that we are all in right now with the conflict in the Middle East. However, I think there was a better preparedness compared to 2020 from digital, from visibility and so forth. Now, it came at a point where everyone was taking the next leap, which is embedding AI and bringing autonomousness to their supply chain operations and visibility using artificial intelligence. However, this is maybe my personal view. It came at a time where still there is no much maturity in AI usage, because for AI to operate and orchestrate and provide visibility, it has to sit on a solid foundation of data, of learning, of context, of history, because it learns. The AI will not generate from vacuum. It will generate from your own organization practices, history, best practices globally, and so forth. And then it can give you the right approach, the right decisions, the right tools, and so forth. And unfortunately for the AI part, us as a collective, we're still not in a level of maturity, and this hit us. So as far as I can see today, there is a limited impact of AI to help supply chain practitioners at this time and day within this conflict. But probably, the next leap, just post-COVID, the next leap will be our our adoption of AI would be better as an outcome from this. Sorry to cut you, Mark.
No, I was only interrupting because I thought that was a very good moment to look at the results of the poll that we've run. We've got hundreds of people on the call right now. Have they used AI to help shape their response? And this is procurement and supply chain professionals from around the world. No, the answer is 53%, but 39% have used AI, yes, which is quite significantly up from last week when we asked the same question. So maybe we are learning, as the days pass.
Exactly. As I said, it's a learning experience, but also it came at a juncture of time where there is a lot of piloting and testing on AI. People were still trying to consolidate their data, consolidate their processes, and then build in these orchestration tools and help with AI to make those autonomous decisions and help the buyers and supply chain professionals to make better decisions. So we're still not at that level. And I think those who are already now using AI for it, they are fortunate enough. Probably they already have a good level of maturity on their data sets and their supply chains and supply relationship management, and they can utilize it. But as I said, if we take the lesson of the COVID times, it helped in the maturity of the base digitization and integration of multiple systems in the single view. And now I think this one, we will then move ahead on our AI adoption. So it's unfortunate, but it came at this time, and then now it's a bit of learning, reality, and real scenarios that are happening as we speak. So people will start to adopt that.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sharmel, I wanted to come back to you because you touched on the issue of the question that we had in what should be the approach if suppliers ask for an uplift on their existing contract. And we had this other question, is there anything procurement teams can do to limit profiteering from suppliers as a result of the current situation? I would be very interested to get your thoughts on these, whether you've seen anything like this. I attended last week a meeting of a group of procurement leaders working in the construction industry, and a number of them were reporting that they are getting notifications of price increases from suppliers, especially those in energy-intensive industries. So they talk specifically about adhesives, glass, cabling, copper, potentially steel coming down the line. Now, their view was that they were pushing back against those price increases at the moment from their suppliers, but I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
Well, Matthew, we are always saying this, and unfortunately, whenever there's a conflict or something that causes disturbance in a supply chain, some people, I would say, would try to always get the benefit out of this, or some suppliers are really hurt out of this. So I always push for two things. Number one, as I told you before, to build your supplier relationship management in a very good way. You have to identify your partners very well, and you have to sit down with them on such situations and roll out or plan out how you will manage this. And when I say you, I don't mean his organization or my organization. We're talking the complete supply chain. We have to see how can we handle such risk. Maybe we can split the risk in some way. Maybe he can handle better than me. Maybe we can try to find out a solution for this. The second thing, this is mainly related to maybe for logistics part or transportation part and things related to energy consumption or gas mainly as well. We always try to put or use index-linked contracts for this to enable sort of a dynamic pricing mechanism. For example, this is what we are having here in Egypt. We had an increase of gas prices with around maybe 17% in the past week, along with an increase in the forex rate for US dollar in the country. So I've started seeing requests from suppliers. Yes, we need to increase our even agreed upon pricing because of those two. Of course, since we can calculate or link our transportation with the gas, the mileage, with the gas, or how much gas has been used, we can expect the, let me put it this way, reasonable raise they deserve. It will not be 70%, it will not be zero, but it will be something in between. We have to sit down and discuss. So I think those are the two main things: to have a very good relationship with the supplier. The second thing, maybe use index-linked contracts with them.
Great, thank you very much. Taking a few questions and comments that are coming through. Yes, there will be a recording and we will share this with you afterwards. We had a specific question come in about which AI tools are most valuable. I don't think we've got the time today to cover that, but I should tell you that this week, if you visit the CIPS download website, we're holding a series of AI webinars all week, and I would recommend those to you. You can register for those. We're holding 7 over the next couple of days. So look at the CIPS download website. There are also questions about, can I become a CIPS member? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. And the CIPS.org is the website. If you have any issues, just contact the team directly or go onto the CIPS Connect community forum and somebody will be able to help you there. I think we should answer a poll question now, if you don't mind, the next poll. After that, and I was going to come to you, David, that we have had a question in, and maybe Ben as well. The question is, should the restrictions on oil supply be a powerful catalyst for increased sustainable energy sources being more widely adopted and rapidly adopted? So is this going to be the catalyst for that kind of change? But let's have a look at the poll question, which is, has the situation in the Middle East already led your organization to alter your supply chain? So have you already taken action to change your supply chains? The answer to this question last week, I can give you the results so we can compare those. Last week, we found that 26% said yes, so already had changed. 56% no, but we were only a few days in, and maybe 18%. So maybe we should get a look at these results and let's see how rapidly the changes are taking place. So, in fact, no, 56%, yes, 22%, and maybe 22% as well. So there's still a process going on, but we are still looking at, up to a quarter of procurement and supply chain professionals represented on this call looking to have already altered their supply chains. Thank you very much for taking that poll. I wonder what your views, Ben, are on those poll results.
In a way, I'm not surprised, to be honest. The consideration that people would have to take to really dramatically change their supply chain in flight in the middle of managing this crisis probably is not foremost in people's minds. Depends what we could define as change potentially, but there's a long-term adjustment to how you consider supply is probably what we were getting at. But I think this is enough motivation to get organizations to refresh how they feel about their exposure as a result of this and all the other adjacent factors I described earlier about the dependency on global supply, and plenty of the conversations pointed towards the choices between deglobalization or nearshoring. Those are the choices that are emerging as have been described. I wanted just to pick up one other thing whilst I'm live, as it were. If the question on AI, I spent about a year now talking to people around the world about the use of AI. The pickup arguably has not been as rapid as some have described originally about 12 months ago. But if anybody's willing to drop me a line either via my LinkedIn or on my CIPS email, ben.farrell@cips.org, to tell me what AI you've been using. It'd be really interesting to know. One of the things CIPS is going to do is we're going to create a perspective on AI usage for supply chains and procurement generally, to share what would be best practice, peer review, that type of thing, to help people understand where the choices are and what's an effective use of it in the future. So I'd love to hear people's views who have used it. And there was one other question that I'll come back on. It was about the Caribbean and whether there'd be any impact in the Caribbean. And I thought it was interesting to probably say the answer is yes. The specifics I probably couldn't draw upon. But yesterday I received a note, a message from someone in the Maldives saying they wanted to just alert me to the fact that the price of goods in the Maldives have doubled. And they were pointing to all the sort of things for hospitality. So the ripple effects of what's going on around the world now are deeply profound. I was in Delhi on Friday. They were queuing at the petrol pumps. The restaurants were closing for lack of gas. So, you know, this is a global phenomenon. It's pretty difficult to argue that it's not having an impact everywhere. So the answer to the Caribbean community is, I think you should, if you haven't felt it, expect it and think about the opportunities now to manage that and what that might look like.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. We had a number of questions I mentioned already from across Africa, one of which was, what are the risks of inaction on the African continent specifically, and what mitigation steps can be taken? Now, CIPS's regional manager in Southern Africa, Paul Voss, wasn't able to join us on this call, but his answer to that question was that the conflict exposes Africa to higher energy prices and supply chain vulnerabilities, underscoring the danger of relying on external trade routes and inefficient port infrastructure. And in a few of his comments, Paul makes the comment about the port infrastructure in Africa. African economies risk deeper inflation and lost growth opportunities unless they rapidly strengthen regional logistics, port capacity, and supply chain resilience. Paul Voss, VOS, is on LinkedIn. He's CIPS's general manager based in South Africa, but I know he'd be very interested to develop any of these the questions that you've put through. So thank you for those. I wanted to come back to David. Do you think this is a tipping point, David, in terms of a movement to sustainable energy sources?
So I think the answer depends a bit what we're looking at. So, for example, I think if you look at this through the European lens, Europe has a slightly more challenging landscape just in terms of the ability to generate power through wind or solar, just climatological factors. I think if you look at it through the US lens, you'd probably think that there's no real change from today's policies, but US automotive companies are certainly in an increasingly difficult position where there will be more of a drive towards electric vehicles. But I think the big story around renewables is China, who has for many years now been diversifying their energy sources, both for a situation such as we're in right now, but also for macroeconomic reasons as well. But almost more interestingly, they have been developing significant capabilities around the export of renewable technologies around the world. And particularly developing countries, those that have optimal wind or solar opportunities. Just in the last year or two, the amount of technology that China has been selling into those countries has significantly increased. And I'm not sure if I'd go as far as calling it a tipping point, but this will certainly be where there is that type of opportunity. This will accelerate it for sure.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks, David. That's great. Let's run the final poll, and then I want to come to John for his instant analysis of the final poll results. And the question, this is about the permanent or long-lasting impact on global supply chains as a result of this conflict in the Middle East. So is the situation in the Middle East likely to permanently change your supply chains? And there are three options again: yes, no, and too soon to tell. So this is the longer lasting impact that you foresee. Last week, 21% of the professionals on the call said yes, 20% said no, and 59% said too soon to tell. So I think it'll be very interesting to see. And I think we should have a look now at the results, if you don't mind, Claire. Thank you very much. Still too soon to tell, say 53%, 25%, a quarter say yes. So the figures are nudging up in terms of the sentiment. Now, to Ben's point previously, it's perhaps clearly too soon to tell whether we're looking at permanent changes here. But John, I would be very interested in your views on this.
Yeah, it would be interesting to change the question and to ask, has it changed since 2016? So if we look at a world prior to 2016 where globalization worked effectively, nobody spoke about supply chains because they weren't news, they just worked perfectly, and somehow magically everything arrived where we wanted to on time and on cost. And now what we've had in the last 10 years is constant external influences on the reliance and robustness of our supply chains, be that Brexit in the United Kingdom, be it the introduction of Donald Trump and anti-globalization policies, be it COVID, be it wars in Ukraine, be it wars in the Gulf, be it, the Panama Canal not working effectively, the Red Sea Houthis attacking, meaning you can't go through Suez. And I think if you take all of those influences and you were to ask the question, has your supply chain changed significantly to what it was looked like prior to 2016? I would say yes. I would say that issues of regionalization, issues of not onshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, whatever we want to call it, have come into the lexicon that supply chain professionals are using. And even today, Ben has introduced this notion of a supply web rather than a supply chain, and whether or not we need to be talking about that. Shaima has talked about different, strategies that they've employed and how they've evolved and how AI has come in to create a possibility to see. I think AI is allowing us greater visibility on what the challenge is. I think the problem we got now is how to use AI. And whilst I'm here, I would encourage everyone to link in with Joe Peppard at University College Dublin, who's an IT expert and has written a number of articles on, is your organization ready for AI? So there's a lot of capability out there, but it's actually taking it into organizations and organizations being ready to leverage it. So I think that there are enormous supply chain challenges. There have been. The supply chain profession has achieved distinction in dealing with lots of sort of left field challenges that we couldn't have dreamt of in 2016. And I think our supply chains are always evolving. And as I always say, it's the job of the procurement professional to do what they need to do in the context that's set before them. You can't choose the game that you have to play. You have to play the game that's in front of you. And supply chain and procurement professionals have been outstanding in doing that over the last 10 years when they've faced enormous challenges.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you for all your comments today. Thank you to all the panel. I'm going to come back to you for any closing comments, Ben, and maybe particularly about, let's just reflect on the personal toll that a situation like this, coming on top of so many other crises and so many other challenges in recent years. I mean, this has been a remarkably tough time for people working in this profession, hasn't it? What would be what would be any words of encouragement, perhaps, to get through yet another crisis?
Yeah, the facts are, we've seen them through our surveys. We run a quarterly pulse survey, and one of them is a reflection on, I suppose, it's described as the anxiety within the supply chain professionals community, and we have topped out really in the last 12 months around that. It's all about capacity to respond to different events, the demands that are being placed on procurement supply professionals within organizations, by the boardroom, etc., to make sure that the organization stays on course. And this is almost double down on that requirement. So my view, and we've started something called the Great Conversation this year, which is a global conversation to consider the evolution of this profession, reflecting all the skills that are now paramount in any organization to manage the world that we live in. And that's combining all the sort of crisis response, the levels of resilience we've talked about, creating the world, I describe it, creating the world we want to live in through, the climate change agenda and the management of that. So there's an awful lot of pressure, an increasing amount of pressure on all of you managing this. But I have to say, two things. Please keep in touch. I love hearing from people around the world as to what is going on, and being able to use those examples. I'm often asked by the media to comment on what's going on around the world. So it's massively helpful to have real life examples. So please do drop me a line, everybody, and to provide some colour and picture as to what's going on. And also, I just give you encouragement and well done to everybody who's responded so brilliantly to manage all these continuous crises. I mean, we had tariffs and we were reshaping global supply chains. Not long ago, we had another go at tariffs and do it all again. And now we've had a couple of crises on top of that with a war as well. So it's not going away. And I just would offer my encouragement and congratulations for all the work that you continue to do. We'll keep in touch. We'll run some more of these webinars, so it's an opportunity to share best practice. And please do continue to ask your questions, and we will respond as best we can. So thank you to our excellent panelists today. I'm going to hand back to Matthew in 1 nanosecond. We will share the link to this and look forward to keeping in touch on this issue as it plays out in the coming weeks. Over to you, Matthew.
No, it was just to say thank you, Ben, and thanks to everyone. And just to say, as a last comment, lots of backing for the supply web rather than the supply chain, including this great comment from Karan, who said, yes, supply web looks like the future because supply chains break. A supply chain breaks at its weakest link. A supply web reroutes. So I thought that was a great comment.
And then next week we can talk much more about this. I've got a vision of what it looks like, how you can manage this great web. But I think it's time for an evolution in some of our thinking. I spent lots of time with different governments, different organizations around the world. There's a clear push for what they describe as local content, procuring from within the nation as well. We can talk about how this plays out in the future, but I do think it's right to have the conversations about how all of this will evolve into the successful management of this sort of disruption in the future. Anyway, we're over time. Great to see everybody. Thank you for joining from all over the world. Quite incredible. Do keep in touch. Cheerio, and thanks to the panelists. Great job.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. See you later. Have a good day at MIT.